things over to our presenter today, Leanne, who is a Quality Enhancement Specialist with CQL. Leanne, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Seth. I am so looking forward to today's session. Here we go. So really, thank you for being here. I know that there are a variety of other things that you could be doing, and really appreciate your shared passion for this topic. It's one of my favorites. So as Seth mentioned, I'm a Quality Enhancement Specialist with CQL. I live and work, play in Manitoba, Canada, and work within the disability community here, have for the last 4 decades. And my experience and partnerships with CQL, while over the last 5 years have formally worked with CQL for the last 25 or 30. I have, like you, been partners with CQL for accreditation and training and whatnot. Besides my work roles, I'm a mom, I'm a partner, I'm a farmer. And I like nothing better to find myself canoeing or hiking far away from civilization. So that's me. This webinar is about moving us beyond doing activities towards supporting people to be truly, truly known in their community through meaningful roles. For many years, I think our sector has focused on helping people be in community. Hugely important, but and I think that was important because it was a real shift away from institutional settings. But over time, we've learned, I think, something important. Being physically present in community is not the same thing as belonging in the community. Someone can attend events, go to activities, even spend their entire day in community spaces, but they're still not noticed, known, and missed. They aren't valued when they're, or missed when they're not there. When someone is known as the volunteer at the animal shelter or the regular at the coffee shop, maybe a teammate on, a floor hockey league, or the neighbor who shovels the sidewalks, pretty important up here, that changes how people see them, and it then changes how they see themselves. And that's really kind of at the heart of what we're going to explore today. We're going to talk about why valued social roles matter and why activities alone aren't really enough. We're going to explore what social roles are to be sure that everybody's got that sort of foundation, what they're not, and why social roles are so effective in shaping identity and opportunity for people. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about common barriers in both our practice, but also in our mindsets. We'll really spend most of the hour we have together in talking about practical strategies, because that's really why you're here, right? We will touch a little bit on how leaders can create those conditions of success. And really, I hope that today takes maybe some theory you have and really leverages it clearly into practice. Okay, so let's get started. Many of you, I think, are practice organizations. We have such a diverse group of people in the room together from so many different countries, but in some way you found yourself here. And so I think you may have some familiarity with CQL or the Council on Quality and Leadership, just given the fact that you've showed up today and that your organization and you are investing your time in learning doing on this topic, I know that we have a congruent or shared vision and mission that really resonates with you and complements the work that you're doing as well. CQL's vision is a world of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people. And that all is really important because, we are talking about everybody, not just folks labeled with a disability. We do that through focusing on being able to define, measure, and most importantly, improve quality of life of people supported by our partner organizations. And again, no surprise, that personal means that people define what is important to them. We do this in lots of ways through the use of personal outcome measures, through partnering with organizations like yours to achieve accreditation training similar to this one. And so that's just a little bit about CQL, but let's get started into why we're here today and why this conversation matters. Many people receive supports. Many people who are receiving supports are physically present in community spaces, but may not be truly included. They attend activities, right? But they aren't noticed, known, and missed if they're not there. And so quality of life isn't just about sort of being out in the community. It's about belonging, right? And so when you think about, I always ask you to think about your own life, right? Where are places you go that people know your name, right? Where are the places where you have a role, responsibility? Where would someone notice if you stopped showing up? Okay. In this session, we're going to explore how do we support people to move from that presence, that being there, to being of that identity, right? And the next slide really digs into this idea of activities aren't actually roles. I think the biggest shifts we need to do with our thinking is really understanding the difference between activities and roles. Activities fill time. They're good. They reduce boredom. But roles shape identity. Okay. Activities often emerge from our programs or schedules that we set as service providers. Roles exist kind of naturally in community life, right? As being part of community. They have a meaning, a social meaning. Someone can attend many activities and still not be known, right? Roles carry meaning, responsibilities, recognition. People are known for them. They shape how people are seen by others, right? They give status. An activity might be, going to let's use a stereotype, bowling outing once a week with other people from, a service or a program. But a role is being a member of that, Tuesday night bowling league and being the person who helped track the score, right? That responsibility. Someone might be, have an activity of attending a gardening program, right? And that's very different than, a person being responsible for watering the garden beds every Saturday morning in their local neighborhood, right? Both are gardening, but one has contribution and status. You can attend a cooking class, right, with other people from that you live with, but a role actually is becoming the person who helps run the community kitchen once a week. Okay? I'm hoping that you're starting to see the difference. In roles, people rely on you, right? They rely on you. Social roles kind of come from those interests and passions. They're not prescribed outings. And let's be clear, episodic van rides that sometimes people experience. Okay. And so, we want to move from filling time to where will people be missed if they don't show up? Okay, where will they be missed? All right, let's move forward and make sure that we are all talking the same language, right? What actually do we mean when we say valued social role? Right? A valued social role is an identity that a person holds that is seen positively by others, right? So examples are employee, neighbor, teammate, volunteer, an artist, a member of a congregation or of a faith community, right? And when you hold a value role, it means that the person is recognized for something meaningful that they do. Not just as a person receiving services or as a person with a disability, right? And so, roles do really important things in that they connect people to that contribution. They give people a reason to be somewhere. They shape how others are seeing them, right? And when this is really important, when we're talking about valued social roles, first of all, they're positive, they're valued. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But they're also social, right? You need social connection to have a valued social role. And that means that they go farther than labels, right? Or mere roles. I can be an aunt just simply because my brother has a kid, right? But I become I have a valued social role as an aunt when I become the cool aunt that my niece can tell anything to. And she knows that I won't tell anyone, right? And I give good advice. Then I have a valued social role. I can be a neighbor just simply because I live next door to someone. That's just a label or a role. But I have a valued social role with my neighbors when we, exchange and utilize each other's, lawn equipment. Or I watch for their kids when they are, waiting for the school bus. Then I am noticed and known and missed when I'm away for a while, right? And so we're really talking about where people have value and would be missed. A valued social role is a position or an identity that carries social value. Okay. And so oftentimes I hear people talk about folks that they support and they say, oh, he's an uncle. He's an uncle, but yet when you dig a little bit deeper, he's never met his niece or nephew. He's a brother, but there's really no little interaction between him and their siblings. He attends day service, but otherwise, there's very little responsibility. He attends church, right? And he's there, he observes, he leaves. That would be different than, taking the coats when, people come in, or just being the guy that stands at the front and greets people and says hi. Where are you going to be, have that valued social role? Okay. And so we want to be sure that when we're thinking about social roles, that it indeed is positive, it's current, there is actual social connection and interaction, and there's responsibility. Okay. So that is what we're looking for. That's the target we're after. And why does it matter, right? I've already hinted at this a lot. Roles influence how people are perceived, right? And perception matters a lot more than we kind of often admit, right? If someone is seen primarily through kind of the lens of disability or merely as a service recipient, then I think expectations may be lower, right? But when they're seen as a coworker, a volunteer, as a neighbor, then all of a sudden I think those expectations shift. And not just for other people, but for themselves, right? If we want better outcomes, we must pay attention to roles, not just in services, right? Like it or not, our perceptions shift when you learn about people's roles, right? I talked a little bit about my roles when I introduced myself, right? I was a mom and a wife and a farmer. I'm a hiker and a canoeist, right? Like it or not, when someone introduces themselves as a doctor, as an astronaut, maybe a physicist, right? Your notion of who they are changes. Um, what about if someone tells us that they're an ex-con? They've just got out of prison, or they're a janitor. It shifts again. Okay. And so positive roles help outweigh the ableist perspectives of others, of people with disabilities as being less than or likely not able to do certain things. They dispel myths and they combat stereotypes. And so they're hugely, hugely important. That's why they matter. Um, as much as they are incredibly important, roles alone don't automatically create belonging. Okay, relationships are really about what makes roles sustainable. If you think about the roles you hold in your life, the reasons those roles matter is because there are people connected to them. That social piece, right? You might volunteer someone somewhere, but what keeps you coming back are the relationships that you have built there. Roles can lead to relationships. They don't always, but they often do. Whereas relationships, they protect people. People with those strong social roles networks, they tend to have more opportunities and they're more resilient, right? And so that this notion of roles and relationships, it leads us to a brief conversation I want to have about social capital, right? This slide kind of shows the relationship that roles and relationships they kind of reinforce each other, if you will, right? Social capital and valued social roles are kind of close companions, but they're really not the same thing. They work together, they shape one another, they strengthen each other in really predictable ways. But in some of my other work, I often run into people who kind of struggle to understand the differences and maybe even confuse the idea of social roles and social capital. So let's look at that, right? Um, Valued social roles build social capital. Social capital kind of protects and then deepens valued roles, right? So they reinforce each other in this cycle, right? And social capital is we've talked a little bit about what valued social roles are, but social capital is the value of your relationships, right? It's the fact that most of us, hopefully all of us, have somebody we can call when we get that flat tire on a country road, and who do you call, right? It's you're exchanging your relationships with whoever it is, right? Some of us might call a tow truck and pay for it, but others have those people in their network who they can call, who will come and get them, who will help them change that tire, or even just sit with them while they wait for the tow truck, right? We exchange value for our, of our relationships for support, service, information, right? I'm sure, many of you, got your first job or even your current job uh, because of who you knew, right? That's social capital in action. Okay. And so valued rules, right? They create opportunities to meet people, right? When someone takes on a role like a church greeter, or maybe they are a volunteer somewhere, maybe they are walking dogs, or they're helping out at the library, they naturally encounter people who share that space, right? And that role then becomes a bridge to connection. And then we know that relationships grow because you are in the same place over and over and over again around a shared interest. And that social capital then grows out of that repetition and that recognition. Oh, I remember you. That's the guy who helps with the plants every Wednesday. Or, oh, she's the one who kind of organizes the supplies. Or he's on our team, right? And so then relationships begin because people are valued and recognized. And then relationships just deepen the role. So once that familiarity and that trust and that reciprocity start to grow, then the person's roles often become more robust. They get more responsibilities. They gain more respect. They often get more invitations or choices on how they could show up, right? And then so social capital kind of makes the role stick, if you will, right? And then that loop continues because social capital then protects people's place in community, right? When people have a real network of people who know and value them, their role is less vulnerable to being lost in transition, or when staff changes, or there's a disruption in the organization that supports them, right? And so people in that community, they fight for them to stay connected, or they might even show up and say, well, even if your service provider can't give you a ride, I can, I'll come pick you up, right? And so it begins, right? So more rules, more social capital, more rules. And it's just this lovely, beautiful, loop. Valued social roles are kind of the doorway, right? Social capital is what happens when you walk through it over and over and over again. Roles are like social currency, right? Having a really valuable role that is seen as being positive in society kind of opens the door. When people we support lack those roles, doors are closed in their face. Okay. All righty, let's move us along. There's something that I think often happens in what I call service world, or in the services we provide. People can attend something, as I've mentioned, without truly belonging there. They might participate in activity, but no one really knows them. And so they need to be sort of valued if they're going to be, or included if they're going to be valued. I think I've hit that one home a lot. Let's move to this idea of barriers, right? Every time I have this conversation with organizations or people who I work with, there's lots of things that get in the way, right? Common barriers that keep people kind of stuck in activities instead of moving towards roles. One of the things that I see often, and I've been clearly, engaged in, is this idea of program thinking, right? Where sometimes services, they'll build programs that kind of unintentionally keep people within services, right? Instead of out there in community life. Some of the ways in which we do that is people only participating in groups, right? Or in special outings, as opposed to just as we'll talk about in a minute, just finding out what people's passions are and going out there and finding where those things happening, right? It's community time, it's program time, it's social role time. That's not the way we build social roles, right? This idea of risk avoidance, right? Sometimes we focus so heavily on avoiding risk that we unintentionally just avoid opportunity, right? The idea of not being ready. Okay, we wait, or we hopefully help people, but we wait for the people to be kind of unintentionally, like, they have to be perfectly ready, right? So it means that people may never get the opportunity, right? I see, I ask you to think about, like, how frequently, were you absolutely ready for your latest opportunity, the job you're in, right? We often aren't ready, and we have to shift our thinking for people that we support from if people should be doing things to how can we help people, right? How can we be there to catch them even if they aren't perfectly ready, right? And we'll talk more about that in a bit. Time, staffing constraints. These are real issues, right? They are real issues, real concerns. And it means that sometimes it's easier to run kind of group activities than to create kind of opportunities for social roles that are meaningful. Those, we have to be creative. We have to get creative, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The idea of over supporting, right? When staff hover, when they hover too much, that makes it really, really difficult to, create natural relationships when you always have sort of somebody right there. Even worse, somebody who interrupts, conversations as they start. This idea of groupthink, right? When everyone does the same activity at the same time. Okay. What do you think happens when a group of people, all who share a experience of disability, along with a couple of staff, show up at a place? Right? Is it likely that people are going to engage in conversation? Is it likely that somebody else there gets to know somebody in that group as an individual? Or are they more likely to be known as, oh, that's the group from the day program. Oh, that's the group from the group home, right? And so group outings, group, hanging out as a group often gets in the way, even though sometimes it's what we have on offer, right? And so, as I said, we need to kind of shift, right, that question of, is it safe, to what would make this possible? What can we do? To, are they ready? To, do we have a program for this? To, where does this happen out there? Where would I, demonstrate and fulfill this idea or passion or interest, right? And if people aren't ready, how do we build competency and skills, right? We need to shift that. This is really about kind of shifting into what I call possibility thinking. And then, you know, bridging social roles is a common term that you may have seen. Bridging social roles really means helping people move beyond service-based networks, service spaces, into kind of the broader community. It's about expanding people's circles, right? And so it might be introducing someone in a community group, or supporting someone to join a local group, helping someone move beyond kind of day program or, you know, activities to like a real community role. Um, and so really moving beyond connection to service settings, okay, or beyond service settings. Okay, so want to make sure we've laid the foundation. We've talked about what we need to do, and so let's dig into why you're here. I think the practical strategies on how do we actually create social roles, or the conditions in which social roles can flourish. Right? And so they're up here on this slide. We're going to dig into each one a little bit more before we finish up. And really, discovery is where it always starts in so many things, right? But discovery guides kind of what follows. We need to, and discovery isn't a form, right? It's this ongoing conversation and process that we have to engage with people. You know, we have to ask people what they care about. What are they good at? What brings kind of energy and joy, right? You know, what gets their head up and their eyes, you know, wide, and their, you know, smiles. What do they repeatedly talk about, right? If we start with just what's available instead of what matters, we're not, maybe people are maybe not going to necessarily want to engage. You might get the no thanks, right? And so when we discover, you know, when discovery really guides where and how roles can emerge, you're much more likely to lead with success, right? If we learn that people someone loves animals, right? Well, what kind of roles could come from that? You know, they could be a volunteer with, they could be a dog walker. They could help in fostering animals. They could be a farm assistant, right? So there's a variety of ways in which that one passion shows up in different places and could be nurtured into a social role. So start with finding out what brings people joy, what draws them, where their talents are, and also where are they already doing stuff, right? Where are they already involved? Because sometimes it's about taking an activity that people are already in and leveling it up into a potential role. Okay, so discovery is where it always starts. Then, once we know what matters to the person, let's look for places where it naturally happens in the community, in ordinary spaces and places, right? Valued roles don't happen in special places. They happen in ordinary places where everyone can go. And so, you know, libraries, community gardens, sports club, the local businesses around the person, in faith communities sometimes, volunteer organizations, right? We need to look beyond disability services. So frequently I see, you know, we learn someone's interested in photography and we decide we're knitting, and all of a sudden we create a knitting club for everybody who receives services, right? Or someone's trying to, you know, lose some weight or is interested in yoga, and we do online yoga for everybody who receives services. Let's go find where those things happen, and then what supports would need to be in place for the person to engage there, right? Way more likely that people are going to gain social roles outside of services, right? So, and when we think about the spaces and places that these things happen, remember online spaces too. If I reflect on how frequently I am online and connected and have social roles online, It's way more than it used to be. And the digital divide for folks who receive services, people with, labeled with disability, is huge. So are we thinking about all spaces, including digital? Then what do? We support people to be in those places, right? Not just to participate, but not just to, I'm sorry, to observe, but to participate, to be fully in there, right? We need to help people contribute and interact and practice skills, right? We want the end game to be people actively involved. And yes, they might observe the first time, right? But not forever, right? Not forever. And so we want to help. How do we help people prepare? So role plays, finding out information about, what happens in these spaces so that people can get prepared in advance. How do we help them build competence and confidence over time? And then how do we fade support? Right? How do we make staff invisible? They're there, but they're not the first thing that everybody sees, right? Then, of course, image matters, right? So, image matters, in fact, way more than we realize. How someone is dressed, how they're introduced, how they're supported and positioned in, sort of community affects how others respond to them, right? So we can make things weird, to be put bluntly. We can make things weird about and in the way in which we support someone, right? When you see someone supported by a staff who's sitting there not interacting with them in any way and just staring at their phone, that's weird, right? It sets them apart. When people aren't, aware of what how others dress in this community and are dressed in different ways, it sets them apart, right? Have we given people information about, hey, this is what other people typically do, right? Small changes can have really big impacts in this area, right? Social role valorization. Not enough time to talk about it in this short time together. But really at the heart of SRV or social role valorization, it is this idea that people with disabilities are often devalued, and the imagery associated and the way in which sort of those everyday decisions about routines and language and about clothing and schedules and all of those things, they help people move to sort of more positive roles that shift the balance and compensate for those devalued roles. Okay. And so the power of introduction is something that I always spend a little bit of time with, right? The power of introductions. You never get another, another opportunity for that first impression. And so thinking about the ways in which people want to either introduce themselves or be introduced if they need that support, right? It's a very, very different to introduce somebody as, you meet a neighbor on the street as they're walking their dogs, and, you as the staff and Joe as the person that you're supporting, if the neighbor comes up and says, hi, you say, oh, hi, I'm Joe. Or I'm Leanne. This is Joe. He lives in the group home. I support him. Very different than, first, hopefully Joe able to introduce himself. But if not, it's, hey, this is Joe. He lives in your, on your street. He also has a dog. And he's a really big, sports fan. His favorite sports team is such and such, whatever it is in the area you're from, right? The first introduction doesn't leave any breadcrumbs, as I call them, for future conversation, right? That neighbor isn't going to know how to follow that up. The second introduction, it introduces them as a neighbor, as a fan, as a dog owner, right? 3 roles that potentially that neighbor is going to be able to go, oh, so am I, right? Sees there's commonality, also an opportunity for future conversation, right? Next time he sees Joe walking his dog, He say, "Hey Joe, what's your dog's name?" Or "I saw that the sports team won last night," right? That's how roles and responsibilities work and relationships work. All right. So I talked about introductions, right? Relationships don't happen by accident. And so we want to really support shared experiences. Make sure those introductions have what I call those breadcrumbs for future, right? And create the space for conversation. That means that as staff, we often need to not be the ones in the forefront. We need to teach staff to step back a bit and figure out how they're going to support people to be at the forefront of each conversation. Okay. Um, Almost every topic leads back to this tension, right? This tension of our duty of care, our responsibilities as service providers, and people's dignity of risk, people's need to grow, right? Growth requires risk for everyone. Right. I mentioned, how many of us were actually, able to do all of the things that we think people we support should do before they move out, right? When I moved out of my family home, I definitely didn't know how to do laundry correctly. I didn't know how to cook a whole bunch of things, right? We grow because we fail sometimes, because of trial and error. And when we hold people back because they're not ready, or because there is risk, without sort of switching it and saying there is risk, can we mitigate it? Can our supports balance this so that we're still responsible for our duty of care? We're still, but that learning can then still happen through experience. Okay. And so there's always going to be this tension, I think, in every topic, but particularly related to valued social roles, right? And we often keep people really bubble wrapped, unable to truly be in community and to show up in the ways that are uniquely theirs, in ways that they would be truly valued and known. Okay. And so that dignity of risk is something we want to keep front and center, front and center. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit, right? And zoom out to our systems, right? Because our systems have the ability to either kind of enable or really block, I think, valued roles, right? And this, so we have systems that can support, and then we have systems that maybe don't support at all. And so, this next slide, really leadership, the organization and the leaders within it, they can create those conditions upon which valued roles are we more likely, by embedding expectations in policy and job descriptions, in like talking about it in supervision meetings, right? Like, do we talk about med errors or do we talk about where people are showing up in community? Both are important, right? But when we only concentrate on health and safety, and we don't concentrate on valued social roles or relationships, it means staff learn, okay, so that's what they expect me to focus on, right? This work is not just done by DSPs, direct support professionals alone. Leaders can really create the conditions for success through policy, through culture, the resources that you put to this, the expectations that you put out there. And so you need to ask yourselves, like, do schedules get in the way of social roles, right? We've all seen people with disabilities have to get up in the middle of an event or a night where because schedules, because staffing, right? And all of a sudden they're leaving before everybody else is. Does transportation enable people to get into community? Does documentation, right? Do your support plans and your person-centered planning? Are we talking about valued social roles at all? right? Have we removed kind of those structural barriers? Are we measuring roles and relationships? Are we, if organization only tracked activities, then that's what staff will prioritize, right? And so we want to think about what roles do the person currently hold? How are they kind of known in community? What relationships exist around those roles? And, are there barriers that can be removed, right? And are we talking to people? Right? Are we talking to, DSPs and frontline supervisors and managers about what's getting in the way? Right? Those are some things that leaders can do in organizations so that they're creating systems that support, right, rather than sometimes get in the way. Okay. So I want to leave enough room for questions, and so I want to, talk about some of our key takeaways, share some resources, and then make sure that we have time to get to your questions. But the core idea here is simple but powerful. People flourish, not just survive. They thrive when they're known and valued and needed in their communities. And our role is not just to fill people's time with activities, but to help kind of open those doors to meaningful roles where people can contribute and belong, right? And so some key activities, of course, are activities are not the same. So activities are not the same as roles, right? We need to dig deeper. Roles shape identity and opportunities. Roles lead to relationships. We've hammered that one. Relationships then lead to belonging, right? A really, really important thing that I want to ensure that you think about is that we cannot create roles for people. Okay? We can create the conditions in that make it more likely, right? We can create more opportunities. We can expand what more is possible. We can also help them like level up, right? Sometimes people are engaged in activities and don't have any sense that they could hold responsibility in that area, right? And so our intentional support, the right conditions can help people move into valued roles in their community, or the reverse can keep people really stuck, right? And so, we also want to remember that we need to, start as early as we can, right? Because remember, what we expect out of people can shape what they expect out of themselves. But even if we haven't started early, start now, right? Start now. The best time to start would have been when people were kids, but the second best time is to start now. And so let's make sure that we start tomorrow, start this afternoon, right? Okay. I know that Seth has been piling some great resources in the chat and talked about the fact that they will share some of these resources in an email afterwards. But these are just a few, resources that have either some of them, some of the capstones and resources developed by CQL on the topic, but also a few other ones that I have found particularly helpful in my journey to understand social roles. Al Condalucci, this idea of culture shifting and thinking about the notion of gatekeeping. I just love that, and so really recommend you take a peek at his stuff. SRV, is critically important if we're going to understand valued social roles. So those are just a few resources that I wanted to highlight before we open it up for some questions that I I want to make sure that you, if you aren't already, that you connect with us, right? You can sign up for CQL's emails, and then you get all these resources and more directly to your inbox. And how cool is that? Also, of course, we have all kinds of ways in which you can connect other than via email. We're on almost all the socials, right? All the social media, whether it's our YouTube channel, LinkedIn, Facebook. That Facebook e-community is a great place if you're looking for resources. I've seen so many sort of helpful interactions where people are looking for curriculum or solving a particular problem, and the CQL e-community helps them out and shares great resources. And so please connect with that one if you haven't already. All right. And so finally, would love to continue the conversation. If there are some questions, Seth is going to let me know. But also, you have my email. And so if there's something that I can be of assistance to, reach out.
So we did get a few questions. First question, Leanne. How do you handle pushback, like concerns related to risk or safety from guardians, parents, other professionals when supporting social roles?
Right on. Yes. Huge issue. Huge issue. Um, and I think it's a really kind of emotionally, like charged barrier, right? Because you're trying to work at something, and you're seeing, and part of it always starts with listening, right? Oftentimes people are guardians, families, they're worried, right? It comes often from a place, I think, of genuine love, right? And years of watching the person that they're, love and care for or represent be hurt or overlooked or maybe failed by systems, right? And so that history, I think, is real, and it deserves an acknowledgement before kind of anything else. But then, it's how do you sort of help them move on from this idea of risk and talking about how do we make this concrete, right? So what are they concerned about specifically about the current plan? And what might help alleviate those concerns and risks and worries that they might have, right? Inviting the family into that discovery phase at the very, very beginning, early, so that they're partners, right? Instead of obstacles, right? Sharing really specific and concrete plans rather than abstract kind of ideas helps, right? In terms of guardians, I always think about what decisions do we need to go to the guardian with versus those that can simply be made by the person. And so sometimes we that pushback is maybe coming from a little bit of habit and anxiety rather than kind of any legal authority that might be actually in place. So those are a couple of my thoughts.
That's great, Leanne. Thank you so much. We do have another question. Beyond DSPs, how can other professionals help in advancing social roles for people?
Right on. Okay. So we talked a little bit about leadership, right? And but supervisors, right? They adjust schedules and expectations where they can, right? I think that coordinators and case managers are often very influential because they can control kind of the planning processes. When they make talking about social roles like a standing item, when they ask things like, what role does this person have in the community? What's getting in the way? Then that changes the conversation, right? If you're a behavior support professional, right? Can we actively kind of reframe some of the what we often call is challenging behavior through kind of a social role lens, right? What often looks like a concern or challenge is actually maybe a response to boredom or isolation or maybe a lack of meaningful contribution, right? So I sort of think about how do we think about behavior plans that include community participation and building positive strategies so that people can get out there, right? OTs, natural, occupational therapists, natural allies here, right? Their whole discipline is about meaningful occupation and participation, right? Communication, speech language pathologists, right? They can work on communication skills that make roles really possible, initiating conversation, that introduction, right? Nurses and allied health professionals, can we shift that medical model that, what does this person need health and medical to what does this person need to participate fully, right? So it's always that, what's that meaningful piece? So those are just a few thoughts.
Those are great ones, Leanne. Appreciate it. We had a couple questions related to this topic, so I'll try to kind of summarize it into one. What type of data can be used to track supports and outcomes involving social roles?
Yeah, this is a tough one, right? Because it feels like it's hard to hold on to, right? I mean, obviously, this is a bigger topic than I can deal with right now in the next 3-4 minutes. But I consider the number and type of valued roles that are being held. Are we thinking about trying to capture that? How long have those roles been? What's the level of contribution and responsibility? Maybe the frequency, like the frequency of non-paid community members, right? Like how frequently are people even in the same space as people who are not paid, are not roommates, are not family, right? They're true community members. You cannot get a valued social role in the community if you aren't in the community talking to other people, right? So trying to focus on that. Those are hard to count sometimes, right? Is there a notion of whether the person is even missed if they're absent? Are we asking people if what they're doing is having meaning and satisfaction, right? I mean, at the core of personal outcome measures is chatting about this and making sure. And you can look at data over time, right? So is there increased responsibility? Is there expanded networks? Are they spending more time with community members? So those are some of the points. They're hard to grab, but those are some of the thoughts.
Those are some great examples, Leanne. Thank you. We are coming up on the top of the hour, so maybe just one more question and then we'll wrap things up. Final question, how do you address transportation issues when supporting people to have social roles?
Transportation, right? You just want to ride. People need a ride, right? And so it is a barrier. But I want you to reframe it as this is a problem to solve rather than a reason to stop, right? So, always ask the question, like, how does everybody else get there? Right? Like, carpooling, public transit, rides from friends, walking, biking, all of those. So trying to mirror those typical patterns that you and I, right? Thinking really creatively, so that roles kind of align with, what transportation is available, exploring natural supports, we always think about paid staff transportation or service provider transportation when you try to figure out what else, how else, right? Working with the person to learn public transit routes, rideshare, I think I talked about, right? Is there ways in which to lean on that social capital, right? That we talked about, so that one of the things that maybe people can, exchange that social capital for is that needed ride.